Hello, and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by CaliberMind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Kamala Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Jesse Willett. Jesse, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me today. I'm CEO of the Revenue Advisory, which is a company that helps people build SaaS companies and grow SaaS companies. So we have one of our companies, Lead Magic, is our kind of new product that we've developed. Kind of started out as a consulting company, but we've been developing assets as well, kind of SaaS products as their own.
And what a great place to start, because you're interacting with so many different companies, you can really identify a need in the market. That just seems like a really cool business model to go from one to the other. As we were talking before we met to record, we both saw this Forbes article, right? And I think a lot of people have seen it, talking about how a lot of really large companies have discontinued their paid advertising and not seen any change in revenue. Do you think that's because advertising is broken, or is it something in the approach?
Yeah, this is a good question. Something that's coming up a lot. Where I've seen some of the challenges are there's a lot of variables in between somebody clicking on an ad and then actually driving into a purchase, right? So we've done a lot of testing here. We've helped our customers with a lot of ads in different areas and paid advertising. And when you really think about it, is if you go through an ad, you'll kind of come out on the other side. And that's really where companies are struggling. There's a few things that I see in common where a lot of the times they're too broad in their message, or they're just not really watching the spend. They're not kind of learning from the prior knowledge, right? Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they'll take your money regardless if you're successful on the ads, obviously, and the ad costs are going up a lot because people are buying more ads just because of the way that it's gone from a digital perspective. I've actually been doing a lot of research actually on this, and I've been scanning your unicorn SaaS companies and also some other ones. And what I'm seeing is some major trends that people are spending a lot more money on ads, but it's a lot of startups that maybe aren't really paying close enough attention. If you have programmatic ad buys that you're buying, you really need to be able to focus on, hey, what are we getting out of this, right? And it really all starts with tracking and data and understanding that. And you can definitely attribute these kind of things from the inception of that person clicking through your ad towards when you actually get the conversion, whether it's a form or a fill out. But to ask somebody to go from an ad to a demo with your sales team is just simply not really a great strategy. You're going to have a driver of some sort that gets them in and does that. And then I think the other thing that I see people doing a lot of is they're not really targeting people where they should be. So you'll see a lot of businesses that say, well, we'll hit the easy button. We'll hit the LinkedIn ads. Well, if a person's on LinkedIn, they're not necessarily wasting a lot of time. They're kind of sitting there and they're kind of, looking up something for their business and that. Where I see a lot of opportunity is to take some of that audience and start to move them towards Facebook, towards other remarketing efforts, and at a lower cost. So it's kind of who there's kind of a acronym that really helps me decide. It's who's the audience, it's ammo. So who's the audience, what's the message, and what's the offer? And any three of those being incorrect, it's going to cause the ad to fail. So, I've done some ads and I've had some ones that flopped completely. And then, but if you haven't actually done it and you haven't gone through the process, you really ought to take a chance. And if you're a salesperson, you could actually probably do this even a little bit. A lot of salespeople that I've worked with have been able to figure this out even quicker. So there's really only one revenue team in the company. And I think that this is something that's going to start to change. You're going to need more salespeople involved, and you're going to need kind of more operational and analytics in the marketing side. So that's going to be where I think a lot of the ad business is going to go.
A prior guest, Carrie Picklesheimer, she said something really insightful, I think. And she said, if marketers aren't using the data from current campaigns to refine their next campaign, then they're completely missing the point. A lot of people look at campaign data as just how that campaign performed and aren't applying it going forward. Do you also see that?
Yeah, and actually, this is a great point. So a lot of people, where they're running ads, they will shut them off if they're not performing well, and they'll go do another ad. So when you're working with a Facebook ad, I mean, the e-commerce industry knows this pretty well. You never really want to shut off your ad. right? So the reason why is because the machine learning model that they have in the audience matching, if you're doing any lookalikes or anything like that, you're going to get that machine learning algorithm gets better over time. So it starts to figure out where to show your ad to get it to convert. So there's a lot of people out there that are running these ads and then they run them, they're kind of running them into the ground, really, because I kind of joke around with a friend. I'm like, a lot of these companies are blowing up a Ferrari on their front lawn every single month of ad spend. And some of them are even doing even worse than that, right? Like, I'll look through a couple of these just as I've been analyzing it. You go through the ad and you're like, whoa, this other thing, I get on the other side of it and I got a wacky drift bot coming at me with music, and I've got 3 forms popping up at me, and I've got GDPR consent coming at me, and it could be pretty aggressive. And you get on the other side of those ads and you're like, has anybody actually tried this? And that's part of the problem is a little bit of the kind of artificial harmony that happens in SaaS companies today. And when I see this or hear this, I get scared. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah, and that really drives to one of the key reasons you said that advertising isn't working is the improper setup. And you mentioned some other factors in there. I'd love to talk through that a bit.
One of the things that I think is really happening right now is the analytics part. And this is partially where I got into my SaaS company's business here, is the analytics part got a lot harder. There was a lot of changes in the way that the security, not to get too technical here, but the security has gotten a lot harder to pass the information accurately through your website. So what a lot of marketing folks that aren't as technical, and this is something that Facebook's recently done, there was a major change with the iOS 14, the new version, the 14.6, I believe. They basically have gone more towards, Safari had this all along, but they went towards that for everybody. And what marketers are going to be limited by is if they kind of have it on the old way where they're just putting the pixel on their site and kind of letting it go, they're going to be limited by the amount of days that they can market to those people. So if they're not figuring out their customer data platform strategy around using different products out there that have a larger kind of cloud storage mechanism, they're going to start to realize, wow, my ads dropped 60% overnight. So when people are doing programmatic ad buys, if you're spending $100,000 a month on ads, you should be connected at the API level and you make sure your domain is verified. And I've been scanning kind of the Fortune 500. I've been scanning the unicorn SaaS that you'd imagine, usual suspects. And a lot of them just really haven't even set up their pixel right. They really need to get kind of maybe their engineering team involved. It isn't an easy task. It isn't a trivial task. It's taken me a few hours to do it. And I'm pretty technical. It was a pretty good amount of work when you first kind of look at it. And you have to verify the domain. So you do need some access to some of the registrar information, and you need to change some things there. So all I could say is, it's going to get a lot more technical. Everything's going to kind of form in the middle of data analytics, and the companies that are able to kind of drive the right insights and the right decisions on these audiences, that's going to be where you're going to see some companies picking up some steam and disrupting the market.
Yeah. And I think there's some people out there who probably thought, I spent a lot of time setting this up a long time ago with Facebook, LinkedIn, all of that. Everything's changed. Facebook, LinkedIn used to use third-party pixel tagging, and now they have a first-party option. Make sure that you're updating and using the most recent code.
Yeah, definitely. And what I've learned too is you really have to test it too. So what I do is I actually have set up some kind of testing, like end-to-end testing, where essentially what I'm doing is I'm monitoring it constantly, because I kind of treat it like a developer would treat it, right? Like a DevOps, right? You kind of have to really watch that over time. One of the other things I tell people is there's a lot of myths that kind of come along with like Facebook ads or anything like that. And the 3 that I hear all the time are, my audience isn't on Facebook. That's usually the number one. And that one is the one that I get really nervous about, because I'm like, yes, they are.
Yeah. People can't see my face, but I made one because, there's people from probably the ages of, I'd say 35 to 60 probably use it more than younger than 35, but there's a lot of professionals in that age range.
Yeah, and what professionals do on there is they're usually available. Like, it's funny when your customers and prospects are on there, and this is the second myth, is Facebook is not effective for B2B is always the second myth I always hear. That is another one that is just not, it doesn't matter who you're targeting. Everybody's on Facebook. And if you're not, the people that you know personally in your life are on Facebook, and they're going to tell you about it. So to get in front of your audience, the most predictable way, is really Facebook. Instagram and Facebook, that's the largest way to do it right now, right? It's even, and the companies that can take their LinkedIn audiences and start to kind of transition those into a Facebook system, that's going to be where you're going to get some of your effectiveness back and your efficiency. But you do need somebody who's testing that the whole way through, and it's got to be their complete focus. And they have to be measured on performance of those ads. And you have to review that in the company, and the transparency has to be there. There's so many organizations where they'll just spend $50,000, $60,000 a month on ads, and they don't even really know what they got out of that. And if you can't really explain it, you probably shouldn't be doing it. You should probably just be creating content or something like that.
Yeah.
Because programmatic ad buys, you really want to make sure that you're driving in the right behavior. Then the third one is that I always hear is, my business is different, or like we do an enterprise sale, or, whatever the case is. That one is another one that is just a complete myth. And here's why, because you're going to need to get to some point where you're offering some value to a person. Mm-hmm. That's before your $100,000 SaaS product, right? So if your product's $100,000, you may have to offer something of value. You may have to train people. You may have to build some sort of course that you're going to have to get these people to do before you get them in. What doesn't work is going $0 to $100,000 of ARR, or, annual recurring revenue for somebody. And, the ones who are kind of doing it with purely a sales team are at the most risk. You need that targeted marketing to be aligned to your SDR team or your AEs that are prospecting these accounts. And there needs to be some value exchange. And if there's no value exchange, you're just not going to get anywhere. So those are kind of the three myths that I see all the time. It's just something that I'm seeing a lot of.
Yeah, and I think through some of the professional groups that are extremely active on Facebook, like DMG, the big marketing group, there are a lot of people talking business on Facebook. It's not just family photos anymore. Another thing I really liked that I'd like to echo what you said earlier is, no matter how the algorithms are and how if Facebook is getting ads in front of people and improving over time and you're still not getting traction, you need to look at your creative and the experience that they're having once they land on the other page. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily know which metrics to look at when they're evaluating a campaign. And don't wait until the campaign's done to look at these metrics. You should be looking at click-through rate, of course, but you should be looking at your landing page and figuring out conversion rates there, bounce rates, like all of those things to figure out whether or not your copy and creative is resonating. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, there's actually, and not to get too far down the path on the Facebook ads, but there's really 4 other problems that I see with Facebook ads. For Facebook ads specifically, your ads, one reason you don't want to shut them down is because you want to get engagement on your ads. So you actually, by shutting one of them down, you will actually lose the social proof that you might have generated by people liking it and engaging with it with comments. And it's funny, even negative comments can help you. And they've even done some split tests there. The other one is Facebook has a little bit of a challenge around overlapping audiences. So what people happen is when they raise their cost, if they're doing so if they're having some success at the lower level, the second that they go up, your audiences start to overlap and you can have a problem there. So that's the next thing. When people do ad scaling, there's a little bit of a problem there. The third one that I see is around split testing. Sometimes your budget's too thin. If it's on 12 different spots on Facebook and Instagram, it could be across, it'll make your campaigns inefficient, right? So it's too hard to actually do the testing. And then the fourth one that I see is people with broad audience matching. So if you're sitting there kind of doing interest-based matching and you haven't really evolved to more targeted advertising around trying to match up the person one-to-one, you're really kind of behind, because the best marketing teams are right now, what they're doing is they're finding the people on other networks, they're retargeting them, they're getting them into their funnel, and then they're using a persona and an audience capture, and they're getting them into the Facebook. That's kind of your new way to prospect people. So, some advanced techniques here, but what I'm seeing is people that are able to make these ads line up with their business, the B2B companies that they're targeting, are really, really going to drive a lot. And one company that I could tell you, if you look at the company Monday.com, they just filed their S1. If you look at their model, it's pretty incredible. They are growing at like 80%. And what they're doing is they're spending all of their money back. Well, they're spending a good majority of their money back in ads. So when they hit the public markets, a lot of people could say, wow, they're way overspending on sales and marketing. That's a complete waste. Well, you never know, right? So what really is the case, what could really be the case is that they're actually doing it very well. Their ads seem to be scaling at a really nice pace. And what I'm noticing is it looks like they figured out the conversion problem over time. And, it could be a really good way to, this isn't any investment advice or anything because I don't have that authority, but, it's a really interesting way that they're going to market. It's kind of a new way rather than a whole sales team and SDR team prospecting, right? They are really using ads as their SDR team.
Yeah, and they're creative. I've got to say, from my perspective, is very good. They're actually talking to humans like they're human instead of just spewing a bunch of weird made up tech terms, which is actually a great segue into I know you've done a ton of research. Let's talk through which high growth companies are doing a lot of advertising right now. You mentioned Monday.com. Who else is doing it best?
Yeah. So what you'll start to see is when you start to really peel back the onion, you'll see kind of there's kind of an environment. There's a certain type of company profile that definitely is struggling a little bit from a execution standpoint. It's the ones that have a massive gap between that initial like $0, the customer spending nothing, to 100. Whatever that 0 to 100 is, it could be 50K, it could be $100,000 annual contract. Companies like that, I'm finding seem to be having more and more challenges when you look at kind of their audiences and their messaging. And, I'll get some ads and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I really should not have got this ad. And I know exactly why. There's a broad targeting audience there. So the companies that are doing well are the ones that can sell something or get them to fill out a form on the first click. So the 1-page funnel. And that's what you got to start with, because you got to remove all the control there. You got to remove all of the other controls in your targeting practices. So, you have to capture something. You have to get some level of engagement when you get them to that page. And that page has to be pretty limited in the options. It's a conversion page, right? It's a page that you're trying to get them to take an action. Now, I know there's a thought of, don't put forms in front of your customers, or you've got to put something there that shows that they're interested and you should continue to prospect them. And you got to measure that over time, and you got to find the audience that's willing to do that. And you got to have a product or an offer that it could be free or something of value, right? Monday.com, you can obviously sign up for a free trial. There has to be some intermediary step. You can't just start at your, $100,000 a year ARR software with your big expensive sales team and expect that the outcome is going to be good. So the companies that I see struggle are the ones who have got invested in these massive kind of ABM programs. Usually they've got every tool. Some of the tools they say, some of these tools, they don't realize they have the same tool bought 4 times because they don't know the difference between what these tools are supposed to be used for. And that's where I see an opportunity for my product, Lead Magic, just because I'm just trying to get salespeople and, marketing people essentially the data of like who they need to call. You just need the intent. You just need to know who's coming to the website and what pages they're visiting. And that tells you exactly how to go prospect them. So anyways, that's kind of the companies that are struggling. It's that enterprise 0 to 100, sales leadership doesn't really understand marketing, chief revenue officer kind of been around for a while. I kind of can think of the profile. I don't want to, obviously stereotype, but those companies struggle, and more is not better for them. More is a lot worse. So, they tend to invest in these expensive call dialing systems and cold calling and all this other stuff. I just don't even
Smile and dial always makes me nervous when I hear that. Yeah. Yeah. If they don't value operations and people who are skilled at getting the most out of what you have, that's another huge red flag. So I'm hearing, if you don't have a web tracker installed, do it like yesterday. so you can understand where people are interacting and doing. Forms aren't bad if you're targeting the right audience. And then another thing I've seen that I thought was really interesting is a lot of companies are moving to B2C to B models instead of just straight B2B. And I think that's been a lot really effective for some, like Asana, Zoom did that. It just seems to be an interesting way to go, which is a great segue to a lot of companies were really product led and investing almost strictly in product development. What do you think this new trend of these unicorn startups really investing in sales and marketing says about that product-led growth model, if anything?
What's going on there is there's also some people that say, hey, this is going to get rid of sales, but it won't. I'll kind of touch on that in a second. But what you're talking about is kind of the evolution and how people are realizing that product-led growth is important. And you just have to basically chase the right animals. So there's a couple of great charts. If you go on Google and you look for how to get to 0 to 100, there's different animals you can chase. What you really have to do is lock into the one that you're going after. So if you're in a PLG model, or you're trying to sell your product out to 1 million people and you're trying to go after the end user, you really have to do that. So you have to commit to that. So if it's Airtable, right? Let's just kind of look at something like an Airtable or even an Asana, right? You start out your journey, you're an end user at a big corporate Fortune 500. You have to make sure there's no friction there, right? You have to have the credit card process. Everything has to be aligned. There can't be anything that they have to connect to from a security perspective.
Yes, that's a big one.
Yeah, governance of the data. So they can't have, you have to make sure that it's not like accessing any data. You can't have any limitations there. And then what you need to do is you need to look for the aha moments. So the customer you have to know that pretty well. And that aha moment is really where you can possibly start engaging from a sales perspective. That is even a little bit maybe early, but it's still better than kind of starting at $100,000. So it's almost, you have to depend. And a lot of companies are trying to make the switch, but they're not actually doing, like I've seen, I won't go through the name, but I saw one and they're in a big enterprise segment, but they're trying to go down. You can tell what they're doing. They're trying to get to the PLG, and I look at what they're doing, and it is, I mean, you could throw up a SaaS product in an hour that would have a better website, the whole system end to end, better than what they've tried to kind of move to as a PLG model. And that's good. They're growing. Hopefully they have enough cash runway to get there. But to be in both segments where one is heavily focused on sales and the other one is heavily focused on your traffic of getting those free trials and people using the product, it's going to be a funny kind of intersection there, because you're going to have a pretty big conflict between marketing and sales. And the marketing team's going to work on the PLG, and then your sales team is going to be out closing enterprise deals. And if those companies are still, I don't think many of those companies are going to make it. They're going to probably become I call them the Walking Dead. They're the ones that you kind of go into and you look around, you're like, uh-oh, this isn't good, right? And there's a lot of those out there right now.
Yeah, I see a lot of on-prem companies trying to move to cloud, and it is kind of painful to watch.
Because you look at a company like a Cloudera. They were just acquired by a private equity company, KKR, massive sales team, right? And great product. They built the Hadoop ecosystem, merger with Hortonworks. I worked at Hortonworks. Just a great company. But one of the things that happened, obviously, it appears that the enterprise model has caught up to them a little bit. It looks like the Snowflake of the world, the one that came in, has probably impacted their business, right? If you want to look at it, right? They've got a massive sales team. And it's funny because as you monitor you monitor their website, you monitor everything they're doing from a marketing standpoint, and it's pretty easy to tell. I'm actually scoring kind of all these companies, and I'm looking at like page experience and things like that. And I'm going to start releasing some of this information on my site, revenueadvisory.com, in the blog section. But it's going to be interesting to kind of see over time. I can kind of see the profiles of companies that are going to be in trouble, right? Because the leadership team has moved on. The sales team's still back in the early days of enterprise software, IBM days, or like the early kind of mainframe days.
Yeah.
And those companies are at massive risk. And the sales teams there are at massive risk.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting battle as this PLG movement continues, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just like sadly nodding. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. I think the sad reality is that B2B is always several years behind B2C when it comes to certain trends. They just pivot a bit faster because they have to. They're dealing directly with individual buyers. But one of the things coming out that's been making some waves or should be making some waves in B2B is the changes in third-party cookies and some of the other changes you mentioned on mobile iOS, the last release. Inevitably, that's going to at least change how we do paid advertising. What should people be doing and thinking about now, today, to prep for that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've gotten this one quite a bit. So what's essentially happened is the way that you can use first party cookies is dramatically changing, except it's not going to, so the really, really good marketing teams really understand this still and probably we're already doing the right things. What you really have to start out with is you have to start out with your customer data platform strategy, right? So what you want to try to do is collect as much as you can, but do it in a way where you're meeting all of the global requirements. And I say that kind of like GDPR, so, there's CCPA, there's New York Shield, like you want to do that. And the way that you have to do this is what it's going to do is it's going to be interesting because the people that will actually have it the worst are going to be the small businesses that aren't able to build these massive data platforms that can kind of, you'll see tools out there like Segment or, some of the different tools that are out there to kind of capture this data, to kind of join all these cookies together. But what you're going to see is people that aren't really paying attention to it either. There's some companies that have the money, but they're just ineffective. What's happened is there's a default transition where the attribution and everything that you're going to have limited data to go after. So the first thing you want to do is focus on making a good impression, right? Out of all the things you can do, make sure you make a good impression and you try to kind of say why you're tracking this data. Now, of course, you're just tracking their data and you're trying to sell to them, but you go on Google every day and you're not thinking of anything about them tracking your data. They're doing it in massive skilling. It's really unbelievable what they're doing, right? But if you literally think about it, it's going to go from a 28-day to a 7 for these conversions.
Yeah, and that's for folks not keeping on top of this. That's how long cookies are stored on the devices. So the 28-day to 7-day, that's specific to iOS and Firefox, and Google's making similar changes.
Yeah, so what you really have to do is you have to make your first sale. So the first sale you're going to make is why you need to get their data. I've just been blanketing saying no to everything on that one right now, just to kind of see how these companies respond differently. I'm just testing a lot of that. But the next thing you want to do is you got to operate with only 8 events, which means you got to standardize these across your business. You can't change them, right? These are 8 events that happen on Facebook, and you absolutely can't change them. And you have to get your domain verified, which is another thing that a lot of people haven't done yet. So on Facebook, you kind of got to make Facebook the kind of how you're tracking through all of these problems, right? So like I'll give you an example for a SaaS company, it might be like purchase, filled in information, trial. You've got to escalate it, and you got to have those 8 events, and those 8 events can't change. And that should be the only common language in your business. That's where your sales methodology is going to probably have to start to pivot to. And you want to explain those benefits, but what you don't want to do, you do not want to try to opt them in before and then have them go through the iOS opt-in, right? That's where people are getting into trouble, or they're doing stuff like that, or they don't understand kind of you got to make a good first impression for them to keep going and actually allow it, because it's one of those screens on your iPhone where it's Apple sending it to you. So it's like a pop-up that you'd only see with an Apple. So that's why it's a massive thing. And remember, that's the audience that you want. And that is a massive, massive thing that you really need to take serious. And, I'm obviously helping some of the companies I advise. And then I obviously, from my perspective, like we're really focused on this because we run a lot of programmatic ad buys with our sales and prospecting. But that's kind of what you have to do. You have to pivot dramatically, and you got to get some people that look, you might have to pull one of your engineers and bring them into marketing at this point. That's what a couple of my customers have done. They've put other engineers on the marketing team.
That makes such sense to me, because the most effective advertising is highly targeted, segmented, and the only way you can do that is to collect data in a streamlined way that makes it less cumbersome on the person who's providing it. So I don't suggest to my clients that they gate all their content. Maybe they have a couple really high value pieces that people are willing to fill out forms for. That's great. Maybe get some chatbots in there that start collecting information of very short playbooks. Like, another mistake I see is people have these really long playbooks with 8 questions.
Yeah, for sure. And like, what you have to try to do is the journey just has to make sense. So you have to kind of go through that, and you do have to have your sales. You have to understand your sales process, right? What I see too much right now is there seems to be this focus on everything that happens after the person fills out a form. The real interesting information is way before the person fills out a form.
Yeah.
When companies start to segment between their SDR team and their marketing team, and they say, well, our SDR team's not hitting the goals, our marketing team is.
That's a fallacy.
You've made a big mistake. Right?
Yeah, that's a total fallacy. Like, Peter Zabayo's CMO was on here, and he's like, if sales isn't hitting their number, if SDRs aren't hitting their number, marketing isn't hitting their number, no matter what they say, because conversion rates should be more important than the actual stats.
Yeah, and what's happening is if you're deep inside these platforms, and you're seeing there's personas that are happening inside the platform. So you have a suit. So if you're doing it right, you only have a pseudonym, right? So it might be like Anonymous Cactus from Tennessee.
Sure.
Right, and that's the name you have, and that's a person, right? Mm-hmm. And that's all you should have. And what you want to do is build clusters or segments to figure out how to convert that group based on your own knowledge as a marketer or salesperson. And what's going on is you have ads going to one person broadly. Like, a lot of companies are still trying to do the PPC where they do keywords. And keywords are fine. It's just, if you're only selling to the global 1,000, how many of those people are going to hit if you're not using one of the platforms that only targets those audiences? Like, I see people using PPC to just consumer. Like, they sell a product that costs $500,000 a year to start, yet they're running ads to people who could never buy their product. There's just no influence that person will ever have at any point in their career or life to buy it, and they're just, that's where the blow up in the front lawn goes. So,
I'm nodding vigorously. I'm nodding vigorously because Caliber Mind in particular, if we were to go out and to purchase like attribution as a keyword, that's going to get so many potential buyers that aren't even close to in our B2B market. You're going to get a lot of B2C people looking for that information. You're spot on.
Yeah, it'll be as I've been tracking the words, and I've seen enterprise software companies that are in like an RPA space that are accidentally buying words like free PDF editor.
Oh no.
Right? Like, it's kind of data like that you just want to say, this is not good, because it's not like a small amount of money. It's like, thousands of dollars of, that one's tens of thousands of dollars a month.
Ouch.
Where they're buying a free PDF editor keyword because they probably have some way to process PDFs as an RPA vendor, but that's their main keyword. They're spending a majority of their ad budget on a keyword that is probably only good for somebody who's downloading like a PDF editor to edit their taxes at the end, or their W-9 or whatever. That's the kind of buys that are happening right now.
Yeah, no, that's sad. Good. That's sad. Yeah. So what are the conversations? We always talk about trying to up-level from subject matter expert to strategic business partner. What are the kinds of conversations that digital advertisers and digital marketing analysts should be having with their CMO or CEO today that differ from what you typically see?
Yeah, the big challenge I see right now is the CRO role is a fairly nuanced new role. A lot from my research, many of the CROs are kind of sales focused. They were sales focused originally. They've kind of gotten promoted. Now they're kind of the the top of the chain there. And then there's a CMO, and it's a little awkward because when the CMO does something, the CRO can do something, and then whoever gets to make that final decision is kind of the important question. And if that number one person that makes that decision is the CEO, then that's the CRO, really. So when you're navigating an org and you look at something like that, what's really hard about that is you have a CEO who might be a technical founder, which I've seen, a CRO who's driven from sales, which I've seen, and a CMO who's driven from your kind of corporate branded marketing.
Yep.
And the three of those together, not one of them is doing the right job, right? They're all out of their own kind of league. And obviously I've become an expert on the digital marketing design. I take it very seriously. I've done I've really learned it over the last year, and I was an enterprise software rep for 15 years, or a frontline VP kind of level. And as somebody who knows data and analytics really well, and conversion marketing and performance marketing, really, I can tell you there's a lot of problems there where the CEO is actually the real problem. It's not really the CRO or the CMO, because they're kind of just doing what they think is right in their own context. And when I start working with CEOs and CROs, they start to understand it. And, CMOs, from my experience, have been having a little bit better time at bringing in technology. Will seem to be a little bit more astute about that, but where a lot of CMOs kind of is that conversion piece. And then the CROs feel like they could just do everything with maybe like a growth strategy or a growth hack, just get me there tomorrow. Right. And, that's been some of my experience, and not being able to kind of take a step back and find the right agency vendors. So it's going to be interesting. There's really only room for one of those two roles to make a decision.
I agree. And I think we're going through some serious growing pains right now, because you have the revenue operations movement, which I'm in support of, but the executive structure I think it's going to shake itself out in the next few years, because I don't think the trend we're seeing right now is the right one.
Yeah, and the RevOps structure, what I always really love is if you really go look at most of the RevOps information out there, it's supposed to be an inclusive kind of group of marketing and sales. But if you look, and I argue you to do this, go look at just about every one of the people that are talking on the RevOps movement. Go find out how much of it that would have been traditional marketing. Most of it is around capacity planning, rep planning, and all of that. Mm-hmm. And they're not talking about capacity planning from a marketing operations system. So right. It's still a silo in its own sense, because a lot of the sales ops teams were above the CRM. When I say above the CRM versus below it, you want to be in that below area because of the customer, the customer data platform stuff, the stuff that you don't know. I'm like, well, how do you go call somebody you don't know their name, but you know their persona? And that's when RevOps people have a problem.
It depends. So I would check out the RevOps Co-op. They have a lot of marketing through CS, so including sales. It depends on where you go. But yes, I agree. I see a lot of organizations that have just turned into a revenue BI team.
Yeah, they download Tableau, they're like experts.
Which is very different than a growth ops model. Jesse.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Yep.
Yeah. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you online?
You can check out my website, revenueadvisory.com, and obviously helping out a lot of SaaS companies now. And then just launched my SaaS product, leadmagic.io, and really good for knowing who to prospect. Stop making so many cold calls; it's not going to work. Love to work with you. So just reach out. Thanks,
folks. If you want to see more great content like this, check out calibermind.com.